Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second edition of the Angular.love Autumn Camp. It's been a while since we last gathered together at the Spring Camp. I hope you all had great summer and now are ready for another solid dose of knowledge today. So I'm Krzysztof Skorupka. I will be hosting today's event for all of you. I'm here on behalf of the entire Angular.love crew, and big thanks to the whole team for the effort they put into preparing these events for you. We are broadcasting live from Warsaw, Poland, but we are also very curious where you are joining from. So please say hi into the chat and drop your location. Let's see. I already see a lot of people in the comments saying hi. Yeah, maybe let's see later if, yeah, we have hello from Warsaw, of course, from Angular.love, and we have someone from Andorra or like Poznań. So it's from Poland. That's great to see that. So yeah, another huge thank you is going to our sponsor, House of Angular, for their support. So House of Angular is a software agency who can pretty much solve any of your Angular-related problems and even more. And if you enjoyed the meetup, please also share this info on the social media and invite your friends so they can also join these free events. Now let's have a look at what we have lined up for today's event. We have two amazing talks from two GDEs. So first, Mateusz Stefańczyk will give us signals in modern Angular, simplify state management and improve your applications. Then Fanis Prodromou will share the next generation of forms, a practical guide to Angular signal forms. And as always, we'll wrap each talk with a Q&A session, so be sure to jump into the chat, post your questions, but also share your thoughts, interact with each other throughout the team, and yeah, feel free to communicate. And also, one last piece of info I want to share. Our next event will be held online on November 25th. So without further delay, let me introduce our first speaker, Mateusz Stefańczyk. I'm pretty sure you already know Matt really well, but he's not only a Google developer expert in Angular, but also one of the main driving forces here behind our Angular.love team. And Matt has spoken at many meetups and conferences across the Europe, but recently he decided to take things a step further and try something more interactive. And now he's also leading Angular workshops, helping others enter this Angular world. So, hello, Matt. How are you doing, man?
Hello, Chris. Hello, everyone. I saw like we have people really from around the world. I'm extremely happy. I'm fine. How about you? Fun and fine as well, right? So I hope like the entire event will be the fun, but I am fine. Yeah. So.
Yeah. I'm also fine. I'm good. And you are right. I'll see a lot of places added afterwards. So that's great to hear that our audience is so broad. And following up on what I've just said, I wanted to ask you, Matt, like where the idea of starting the workshops came from, and basically what do you enjoy the most about them?
So in general, I would say like it's pretty tough question, but honestly, it's I think like it's next iteration for like multiple developers in the career. So simply when I was like starting with sharing the knowledge by writing at the Angular.love or even contributing to some open source libraries in the past, because recently it's not like so common for me, but I used to contribute to some libraries. I didn't think about the workshops, but as I mentioned, I believe like in the entire journey of like the developer career and someone who likes to share the knowledge, contribute, creating your own course or like the workshop, as it is in my case, is kind of this next evolution and next step journey possibility in your careers, like treating it as a next iteration of your hobby, but also as kind of the another source of the things you can earn on and so on, right? So I think like these two things combine together, like something you used to do, like to do, with something you can commercialize and so on. So I think it's pretty common path, and for I believe this is the main source, like connecting the something you like to do, you used to do, with actually a little bit of work, right? So would say like that.
yeah. But yeah, that's what's an excellent answer. And I think that's a really like, big step forward in your career, both. And if you like it, that's even better, right? But let me also ask the opposite. What's the most challenging part of conducting the workshops?
What's like, I believe like when you're sharing the knowledge just like that by some articles and so on, that the pressure is probably smaller. So I believe this pressure is like most challenging, and also like collecting the feedback, hoping that people will give you the feedback. Like also you need entire new skills to conduct this kind of the workshop well, get this connection with the people who attend this workshop. So I believe like developing pretty new skills is somehow challenging for me. Of course, like I had some sort of the soft skills in my career, but I believe like you need to have even more of these soft skills to do it well, and you need to learn them. So this path of learning and getting this kind of the new skills to do it well, and learn how to actually teach people that they gain the knowledge from your workshops, is something that might be challenging at the beginning, and it is for me as well, right? I still learning this kind of the stuff, and hopefully will be better and better in that one.
Yeah, that was an honest question, and I can imagine it's like, so it's a lot of pressure because going live with all of the people expecting to get so much knowledge from you, asking questions and so on. That's that's pretty challenging. All right, so Matt, I think it's time for your presentation. So I'm out, and yeah, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you. So one more time, hello everyone. Already Chris introduced me, so I think I will not spend that much time introducing myself. I'm Mateusz Stefańczyk. As Chris mentioned, I'm Google developer expert. On daily basis, I also work as an Angular team leader in House of Angular. I am pretty active core member of Angular.love, if we can call it like that. Used to participate, create a lot of events, content, attending various conferences, and like trying to merge a few communities each other by attending by myself other communities events, because I believe like it's great to create, contribute as a Angular communities, and that's something we actively do as a Angular.love. Today I will try to talk about the signals in modern Angular, how they simplify state management, how they can improve our application. So let's go ahead. Oh, 1 second, I need to move focus. So why we talk about the state management problem? So first of all, like it's not only about the state management libraries, but I believe like holding the variable, keeping the value of variable, displaying the value of variable, it's already kind of the state for your components, right? So we have been always doing it over the years, like whether it's the simple variable or whether that were observables, all of this data has been keeping our state actually. So we used to have the behavior subjects everywhere, or some other kind of the observable APIs, which lead to some memory leaks, verbose code. We had to trigger pretty often, like manually change detection. If we depends on the wrap variables, we always had to trigger it manually. Of course, in case of the on-push change detection, if we have been assigning the value in kind of the asynchronous context with RxJS, we also had to like trigger the change detection manually. So it could cause some bugs, performance issues, and this kind of the stuff. I believe like every Angular developer is aware of that. We had the complex state management libraries, even though they have been simplifying over the years. The first iteration, the beginning of the state management libraries was tough for everyone, I believe. And the RxJS confusion, when to use it, how to manage subscriptions, and so on. So today we'll discuss what are the signals, like core concepts, we'll explain them. We'll take a look at the most common primitives in scope of the signals API. State management simplified, so how it simplified the most simple state management cases. How we can compare RxJS with signals, what are the compute values, effects, and we'll take a look at the signal store, which I believe is kind of the next iteration in the family of state management libraries, and at the end we will have the Q&A. So starting with what are the signals? So signals are the reactive primitives for managing state in Angular. Also, like there is a Notion smart variable that automatically notify Angular when they change. They automatically trigger change detection. They synchronize by default. They are predictable. They are composable and efficient. Also, like Angular in the documentation mentioned that signal is a wrapper around the value that can notify interested consumers when its value change, right? So simply signal is wrapping the value. It's have some kind of the consumers, so some other signals or our templates. And whenever it's changed, these consumers being notified. We can think of that like that, I believe. It's the pretty simple definition. And they are type safe. So what are the basics of the signal? So signal we import from the Angular core. The creation of the signal is extremely simple by utilizing the signal method and wrapping the value in scope of this parentheses here. So we call the method with the value, right? So signal is a wrapper around the value. So we are just wrapping this value by calling it in scope of this function. And then we can read this value by calling that that function, right? So we are assigning our signal to some variable and then reading it like calling the function. But we shouldn't misunderstand it with actually calling the function, which over the years was treated like an anti-pattern, which was inefficient and so on. Here we are extremely safe. So this function will not be re-triggered whenever change detection occur or something. It will be re-triggered only whenever the value of the signal change. So that's the single reason to re-trigger that kind of the function, like reread the signal. And the single reason for that one is when the value of this signal change. But I can zoom the screen. Let me see. I probably can, but I am afraid that maybe some content will not be visible later. So let me try it now for the second. Changing the size. And if something will not be visible, I will change it one more time then. So 1 second, guys. Is it better now, Phoenix? You need to, guys, let me know, and I will continue. If something will not be well visible, just let me know, and I can try to even increase this size. Okay, thanks. So it's simply to read this signal. We should not misunderstand it with reading the function, actually, which was kind of the anti-pattern, as we already agreed and mentioned. And like updating, setting the value of the signal is also extremely simple. We can call the set method which directly override the value that was in scope of this signal, or just update the value, which of course will change the value, but for the update purpose, we can reuse the past value. And here at the bottom, we can also see like that it can work with any kind of the type, whether it's primitive like number or some complex objects, array of objects, and so on. Okay, here I believe it's fine as well. Sorry, but I'm afraid that something might not fit the content, but here seems to still be fine. So the idea behind the signals is that they will not only replace like RxJS for state management in our components, but also they will replace the traditional variables, right? Because right now, in case of the signals and on-push change detection, and some, I believe, feature iteration and improvement in scope of the change detection, the signals are the most safe way to go with managing even the simple properties. Because whenever we will utilize the signals, even to extremely simple, even that like flags or properties across of our component, will always be safe in terms of detecting the changes. We don't have to remember that some changes has to be detected whenever we write to the value. Everything will update automatically because it's the nature of the signals. So with the traditional variables, as we can see in scope of, for example, add item, if that component had the on-push change detection, whenever we push to the items or we recalculate some value, we always have to remember about triggering the change detection. It's not the case with the signal-based properties. Here, everything will always happen automatically. We don't have to bother with triggering the change detection at all, despite of some edge cases, of course, which we can create in our application. But then in this case, we have to be aware of them. So there is a big confusion because like a lot of our applications already have the RxJS, have this RxJS for years, and I believe in upcoming years there will be places we also will have RxJS because it will be profitable for us. And the question is, should I replace all my observables with signals, or where the signals fit better than RxJS, and so on? So let's take a look at this one. Here is a little bit maybe problem, but still entire content fit, even though it's not looks like. So observables are asynchronous by default, where the signals are synchronous by default. One of them are push-based, other are pull-based. RxJS have pretty complex operators, which we used to know and work with them. We maybe don't need them for all particular cases we have in our application, but they are still cases where it's extremely tough to cover what the operators have been bringing to us, to our programs, our applications, where the signals are perfect for some really simple computation, recalculation, and creating the one value from another. Observables are great for stream-based data flows. Signals are great for value-based reactivity. What is the benefit of the signal is that they automatically clean up, they are memory safe, and we don't need any kind of the subscription management. Subscription management in RxJS also was something pretty tough, especially at the very beginning and some kind of the old applications. If application is old enough, and we'll take a look at the source code, we can see like probably multiple patterns to manage the subscription. So it shows it wasn't that simple from the very beginning. But I want to say that for me, that we have to use both of them. But we have to use both of them like being aware when we want to actually use the particular one, right? So RxJS is perfect for event streaming, some complex async operations, time-based operations, some advanced operators when we need to switch map, combine latest, fork join, and so on, and HTTP requests when we need some operators. And I believe even now, I still, in my case, use the old HTTP for performing any kind of the request in the application, even though I have the resource. Signals are perfect for component state, derived values, simple HTTP request via resource, because we have to remember like the resource, which works by default with signals, is great for get, but we cannot perform any other HTTP operation here, like delete, post, and so on. Put, we only can read. Performance critical updates and some shared state via signal store. So we will take a look at this in the future. Here I probably need to decrease the size, sorry, but it's not looks great. So I make some decision framework when to use which, and for component state, I believe we should use the signals. For HTTP requests, as I mentioned, RxJS and resource. HTTP with retry logic or any kind of the logic where you really need the operators, I will go with RxJS. Form state, well, right now, probably in upcoming months, we can easily say signal forms, but probably Fanis will say us much more about it, how we can utilize the signal forms. WebSockets, of course, RxJS, computed values, computed, global store, signal store, user clicks, extremely simple, like we can handle, but signals, but I don't know, maybe that's even not the use case and I make a mistake here, but some user clicks with the bus or some event streaming logic when you need to some kind of the stream of user clicks or something like that, I believe the RxJS. So let's take a look at the old way of managing the state with behavior subject. I believe this view is known for everyone who has been working over the years with Angular. We always had to like create a lot of behavior subjects at the top of our service, then expose them as observables. Whenever we wanted to update the value, we had to call the next method. Then, of course, we will have there some rather subscription than await. Await like became a good practice in the recent months, I would say, and working with the promise wasn't always the way in Angular. And of course, we have to remember to unsubscribe, destroy our subscriptions, and so on. That's the pseudocode of the things, how it looks like in the past. If we take a look in the way we can manage that with the signals, it's extremely simplified. We only declare the signals. Of course, we can make them as read-only, expose only those signals as a read-only outside of the service, which is kind of the good practice. For update, we utilize the set or update, and like the managing the data is extremely simple. Here, in terms of fetching the data, there is no big difference, I would say. The biggest difference is in readability, composition, and the fact that we don't have to remember about cleaning the subscriptions. But for people who are new to the Angular, I believe this right side kind of the code is much simpler than this left side. Even when we take a look at these filter products, which have to use like combine latest, already some operators to map this value in compared to the computed, where we think simply return the products, filter it by some conditions. That's it. So we can see there is much less code. There is simple management of these values, simple management of this code, and no need to remember about the unsubscribing when destroying. So overall, it simplified this kind of the simple state management for our applications. As I mentioned, also like Signal API provide us with a few other APIs around the signals, let's say, right? So like computed fits into the Signal API, even though like we have the signal function. Computed is also kind of the Signal API. And computed is here to create derived values from the other signals. So as we can see, it's automatically track dependencies, memorize results, and only recalculate when needed. So in our case, we have the initial signal, which contains some kind of the card items, and then we create derived signals utilizing the computed function. And as it mentioned, this computed function will trigger and recalculate whenever the signal is based on change. In our case, it will like recalculate its value only whenever the items are changed. And we can create from the items a few smaller properties, like what is the total price or total items quantity, or what is the average item price, which we also can count from some other computed properties. So this is kind of the destination, the dedicated use case for computed to create derived values from the other signals with full memorization, dependency tracking, and recalculation only when needed. The other function from the signal API are effects. We call it like the side effects, and they are perfect place for tracking some analytics, logging, performing the DOM updates, or synchronizing our application with the local storage. Very similarly to computed, they recalculate whenever the signal depends on change. Okay, there is also. I was trying to like manipulate this. Maybe I will leave it as it is, because otherwise it's not fit the content. But I still see that some of you have a problem with reading the code actually. I can try maybe one more time to change this to something like that. So the effects in compared to the computed, the main difference is actually that the effects don't return any kind of the value, right? So they are not dedicated for returning as the value, but they will trigger whenever the signal they depends on actually change. We can have there some cleanup management, which is not needed in majority of the cases. But there might be the need that we would like to perform some cleanup logic, which in our case occurs whenever we utilize, let's say, interval in scope of the effect. There is also something to create bridge between the RxJS and the signals. It's called RxJS interrupt. And it's the set of dedicated functions which are here for us to move between the world of observables and the world of the signals. So as you can see here, we have defined the signal and observable. And then we utilize this function to create like the observable from the search term. Then we listening for the search term changes and trigger the API request. And then finally, the results of these API requests we are mapping to the signal from the observable. So this is the kind of the utility we can utilize to feed the signals for our already existing application, where we have a lot of RxJS code, right? So that might be the good fit for the people who already have a lot of things done in scope of RxJS, but they are thinking about the way of fitting the signals into this existing code base. And there is like another API called linked signal, so smart state reset. It's very similar to the computed, but computed have this kind of the restriction that we cannot set directly the value for the computed, right? So computed value is coming from the computation of other signals. Here with the linked signal, we have the possibility of computation the value from other signals, but also we can set directly value to this signal whenever we need it. And the great example for that purpose is scenario whenever you are creating some select component or drop-down component, and you have the set of the option and track selected index, right? But there is a requirement that whenever the options change, you want to bring the selected index to the initial value. So link signal is perfect fit for this kind of the challenges when we have the options like it's in our code. We have write the options which are coming from the input. Whenever the options change, which are marked as a source in scope of our link signal, we want its value to be reset to the -1, right? So actually it's not pointing to any kind of the option. But whenever we select the value, we also want to directly set the value of selected index to be equal the index we chosen from the list. And this is the perfect fit for this kind of the opportunities. In the past, people very often utilized effects for this kind of the things, but it was mentioned in scope of the documentation that the effects are not dedicated to synchronizing two signals between each other, right? And then after some time, they released the link signal, which is the perfect use case for synchronizing two signals value between each other. I believe everything what's there I already explained, so we will not go through these dots. And finally, we are reaching the managing the state utilizing some kind of the external libraries. In this case, it's the signal store. I believe from the NGRX, in my opinion, it's one of the best state management libraries right now for managing all kinds of the states, because it's extremely lightweight and can be used as a global state, feature state, or even component level state. Of course, for some maybe big global state management, the old way Redux-based pattern state might be better. But I think overall that signal store can fit everywhere. And even right now, people are creating some kind of the extensions to the signal store that it can also work based on the events. So very similar to something we had with the Redux. And there is a mention that because I compare like working with the signal store as something as working with the Lego blocks. And I will explain it why, but mostly because we are putting their stuff one above each other, and based of like stacking a lot of things on each other, we are composing the entire state. Like so very similar for something like building something from Lego, when we put another brick above another, and at the end we have some kind of the building or something we are trying to build. Here is very similar. We are just taking a few blocks, putting them together, and we compose our state. So what are the most basic blocks, like the base plate, building blocks, and also what is extremely powerful is the fact that we can even create our custom blocks. So like creating two buildings completely custom to just build something else from that one, and so on. So the most like basic block for our signal store for sure is the signal store method, which is responsible for initializing the state. And the second one is with state. And the with state is the function where we define the shape of our state, right? And this state will create for signal for each property, provides automatic reactivity, and it's like the most basic building blocks for any kind of the state or store, actually, right? So the state, because that's the purpose of having the store in the application. The second block are the with computed function. As you can see here also at the left, we are just triggering this function one under another, right? Maybe other way than building something from Lego. So we are putting the another blocks under, not above. That's the difference. But we have a few predefined blocks. So the next kind of the blocks are with computed, which let us to create the computed properties from our store. So it's a function that accepts the store as a parameter and returns new properties, being actually the computed properties derived from this store. And all of these computed properties will recalculate whenever the signals they depends on change. So we can see we use the with computed. It stacks on previous block or below previous blocks. It's question of discussion, maybe how we think about it. Another one is with methods, and they are the place for defining the methods in scope, or actually the actions, effects in scope of our store. Depends what kind of the analogy we choose there. But generally, the methods, the purpose of defining the methods, it's like having the possibility to perform kind of the operations on our state, whether that's fetching the new data and setting that data into the state, removing some kind of the entity, and so on, right? So all kind of the methods we will define in scope with methods block. Here we can also inject any kind of the service that is needed for our store to perform this kind of the operation, whether that's the HTTP service or some service which perform any kind of the logic, asynchronous logic, validation, whatever we really need, we can inject at the level of the with methods and then utilize it in scope of our methods. And again, yeah, important to mention that here as well we have access to the entire store, and what's important that this store here will be aware of the properties that have been created in scope of the computed, and it works like that. In another blocks we'll be putting below that. These blocks will be aware what has been put above them. So if we will create like another with methods, so this another with method block will be aware about the add to do method in scope of our store. And we have also the block for with hooks for managing lifecycle hooks. So it's analogy to the Angular components. And here we have like two of them, on init and on destroy. On init might be great for performing some initial load of the data that we are aware that our store like doesn't make sense without this data being loaded. So whenever we use this store, whether that will be component or even the global store, it always should be computed and fulfilled with this particular data. So we put this logic in scope of the on init in our store that we make sure that this data will be always fetched. There are also like other blocks which can help us to manage our data and our store. And one of them is with entities, which provide us with the entire set of helper functions for managing the entities. It might be familiar for the people who works with the NGRX in the past, because NGRX always has been providing like a lot of utility functions for working with entities. And we simply initialize this entity collection by calling with entity, providing the model of our entity. And thanks to that, we have already initialized the state. So as you can see, we don't have here like with state, because with state is somehow hidden in scope of the with entities, which will initialize our store with the state having like the collection of the entities, IDs of these entities, and so on. And then thanks to this, we can patch our state by utilizing a lot of helper functions like set all entities, add entity, update entity, remove entity. There is even more at the documentation page, but the entire idea is to simplify the way we can manage our entities by utilizing the signal store. So by look at that, we can see how simple like fetching the users and setting them to the state and propagate this data to entire components that utilize this store is extremely simple. And okay, so here we can see how this all Lego stack can work together. We might have with state, with entities, with computed, with methods, and with hooks. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, we are just putting one I mentioned above, but actually below each other. And like they all compute together at the final state of our store to just single item, which will be the to-do store containing all of these properties, all of these methods, which we can then utilize in scope of our components. What is also extremely powerful in the signal store, it's creating your custom reusable blocks, right? So we can create our custom store, signal store feature, which we can then reuse across of various stores. So as you can see here, I am using like my with call state. With call state is pretty known pattern, initialized and introduced for me. I don't know whether in past someone else introduced it earlier, but probably for a lot of people from Angular, it was introduced by Alex Okrushko, one of the creator of NGRX store management. And that solution is here simply to standardizing the way we are managing the loading state of our entities and data in scope of the store. So simply by creating this kind of the reusable Lego blocks, I have standardized the way I will be managing the state, which informs me about the current process status of action, let's say, right? Of status of the action, whether we are currently in the loading state or whether the entity already or action has been loaded or whether there's some kind of the error occur. And thanks to that, I can reuse this kind of the block in multiple store and manage this kind of the information, right? So in our example, we have something like load products. So simply I am calling with call state, which is my custom store feature. And then in scope of load products method, I have simply already in store function, which is responsible for set loading, which will immediately set the state for loading. And then whenever I finish with this action, I can set loaded, which will immediately set my call state that the data has been actually loaded. And this kind of the flags, of course, we can utilize in scope of our components to manage the proper display of the information for the user, whether that will be some ghost elements or something else. So what are the common patterns, best practices? I already mentioned one of them, that we can keep our signals private and expose only computed to the outer world. So whoever consume our... I will answer, Adam, your question after all, okay? Because I don't want to focus on this one. So again, we can expose only what we want. We can keep our signals private for the external world, and this way we might be sure that no one will override it. We can use computed for derived state. We can use effects for side effects only, like logging, analytics done. We have to remember that we shouldn't perform any kind of the signal synchronizing or data fetching in scope of the effects. We can use linked signals for fields, but that might not be the case in the future. But so far, they can perform this kind of the functionality for sure. And convert signals to boundaries. So we can use two signals for observable API. What we should avoid is like using effect to update other signals. So already mentioned, we should try to use the linked signal for this purpose or compute it when we can. We shouldn't put any async operations in computed. I believe in effects for fetching data as well, but for the logging purpose, it's fine. We should avoid exposing writable signals from services. Rather, we should use the read-only or computed. Also worth mentioning that the signal store is by default read-only for the and external world, we can like expose the possibility to writing to the signal to the component or to the signal store from the components, but by default it's abandoned, and we cannot, it's restricted. And we should avoid mixing observables and signals randomly. And we should protect our services by utilizing as read-only. So we have like only 30 minutes to discuss about that. But as I mentioned during the discussion with the Chris, if you would like to go deeper, like take a look at the best practices in managing the signals, or take a look at the signal forums, how to manage your state with the signal store, perform some practical examples like creating the state management store for the e-commerce cart, because that kind of the example application we are working on during the workshops. I strongly encourage you to take a look at my workshops, which you can find on the House of Angular page. Also for this webinar, I have like prepared the dedicated discount for you for only 3 people, because we have like 3 spots left only, which is Angular 70, and it will create the 70% discount for you. So yeah, as I mentioned, if you would like to go deeper with managing the state with the signal, getting into the signal store, I strongly encourage you to take a look. And right now, I believe it's time for the Q&A.
Yes, it is. But first, thank you, Matt, for the very insightful presentation. That was really informative. And yeah, we can jump to the Q&A session. So guys, it's like a last minute chance to add your questions. We already have some, so let me bring them to the screen right now. The first one is from Damian. How hard it would be to migrate bcap to signals from RxJS? Some kind of migrator helper, perhaps?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, like, I don't know whether there is really a reason. Like, I know that the signals are the latest pattern and so on, but also it might not be worth the effort and time it will cost you to just really start migrating your old code. Maybe the best way will be like start with the signals since some point, and then since some point start creating the new services, new properties, and so on by utilizing the signals. And whenever you actually cannot like bring something completely from scratch because something is already or a little bit written in the RxJS, try to play around with this RxJS interrupt. Yeah, because otherwise it will be big effort, and I don't know whether there are really some shortcuts you can do to make this migration easy and smooth. Of course, by looking at the application and so on, we can like prepare and think about some migration path which will be the most friendly for the developers and safe for the application, but there is no probably general rules we can apply like everywhere, and it will create the smooth migration process for everyone. That's my opinion, to be honest.
All right, so let's get to the next one, and this is the one, I believe, from Adam. Is there any pattern in Signal Store to create a generic store in a library included in your application and then expand it with some methods, effects, and etc.?
Yes, I believe there is a possibility. As far as I understand your question, Adam, so recently in my application, I created something like with template entities. And let's say I have like a lot of very similar interface entities which share exactly same like endpoint for every of them. And I created like some generic store, as you mentioned, like with template entities, something like that. I don't remember exactly that name right now. And under that one, there were functions to add, get, delete, and so on, these templates. But each of these templates, of course, had like its own model, which shared the interface between them. And like the endpoints were very similar with the different, let's say, slash at the end, like whether that was template for email, template for SMS, and so on. But under all, they have some common interface based on which I could create the generic store for them. But after the all, when I utilize this generic store as my custom store feature, to each of them particular store, I have been adding some custom and dedicated methods, effects whenever I need it, right? So my generic store has containing the most generic and common methods for all of them, like delete, add, update. But for example, some of them could be shared via the SMS or shared via the email. And all those dedicated methods actually were these methods which you call expanded, right? So had the generic store and expanded it with my custom methods. So definitely it's possible.
All right. Thank you for the explanation, Matt. And let me bring another one. And this is for KT. Is it a good practice to trigger API calls from within the NGRX signal store with methods and update the core state based on the incoming response?
Yes, I believe like that's the purpose of with methods, and that's the best practice you can do, right? So the fact that the state is updated from the within the state, not from the external world, is actually something what create the clean code for us. And that like the fact that the state can be updated from the single place, which is state itself or store itself, it's the good practice. Otherwise, it's tough to track from where we actually updated the state in our store.
All right. And then we have plenty more, but let me bring at least some quick ones. Will Angular become zoneless in the close future?
It's not first time I see this question, and I am not always sure when I'm answering, but I believe it's already zoneless. So we can be zoneless right now, probably.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, from 21, it will be the default.
Yeah, but
yeah, I guess, as far as I remember. All right. What else do we have here? Quick question. Are the signals more common way now to use instead of observables, like performance-wise? Since some core Angular by default gives you an observable, so it's some performance overhead.
So like answering the question, I believe like the signals are more common way now instead of the observables. So if I will be starting something from scratch, my destination goal will be like to go with the signals whenever I really can go with the signals. But there is also like places where we probably cannot go without the observables, as I mentioned during the presentation. Even some, I don't know, listening for the input changes with the bounce time and so on is probably more elegant when we utilize RxJS in good manner instead of creating some custom signal-based functions with set timeout and so on, for me actually, right? So there are still places where I will go with RxJS and the request and all kind of this stuff. And regarding the performance, I strongly encourage you to take a look at the one of the most recent article from our colleague on Angular.love, from Arthur, when he really take a look much deeper into the signals and pointed out actually some edge cases where they might not be extremely efficient as we expect them, right? So I believe like we are still evolving with the signals. We are still learning a lot about the signals, and maybe by default, they can see like the best performance choose, but at some scenarios we can cause them being not performant well. But I'm not able to explain it only during this presentation, right? So I strongly encourage you to take a look at Angular.love, and here is a dedicated article.
All right. So there is still a couple more questions in the chat, but we can't really get through them all because the time does not allow us. If, Matt, you have a chance maybe to jump into the chat to answer at least some, that would be great. And anyway, thank you for being with us today. And I hope to see you on the next meetup, actually.
Yes, I will be there. So we'll see pretty soon with our community.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Oh, thank you. Have a nice day. Bye.
All right. So just to remind you once again, so I just wanted to follow up on what Matt already said. So only until this Thursday, our community can get this special 70% discount on the Modern Angular workshop with Matt. I pushed really hard to get such a big discount for us. And that's because, as far as I know, this is the last one from this topic this year. And there are only these 3 spots left. So yeah, don't miss out. You will have you already basically have all of the info already in the chat. So now it's time to our next speaker. And he's a true enthusiast when it comes to sharing knowledge. He's not only a GDE, he's a co-organizer of Angular Athens Meetup. He runs his own YouTube channel, gives talks, writes blogs, so a lot of stuff. And he is a person who is constantly learning and also helping others learn. So let's give a warm welcome to Fanis Prodromou. Hello,
hello,
Fanis.
hello. What an intro, Chris. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very good, and I'm very happy and excited being here.
Yeah, that's great. So I might regret asking this, especially seeing the autumn vibes and the rain here outside in Warsaw, but how's the weather in Greece these days?
Well, it's a bit crazy, meaning that early in the morning we have something like cold for my skin, for our skin, cold meaning something like 10 degrees Celsius, but during noon it goes to 25. So it's summer again. But yeah, it's autumn, like what you said, and in general, autumn is crazy.
Yeah, that's true. But you still are the lucky one. It's still better than in Warsaw, definitely. I can easily switch. Okay, so one more question, maybe more technical this time. So with the AI being adopted more and more, like in our development pipelines, so what is your favorite or most useful AI tool you use on a daily basis?
Oh, yeah. So actually, I use a couple of them, but usually what I do daily, I'm using VS Code Copilot, which I really like, and it helps a lot. And you know what? It's something like a pair coding pattern, especially when you work remotely, when you work from home. Think the following, that if you are at the office, you have your colleague, and during these usual coffee breaks, you have your colleague, and perhaps a problem that you might have, you can solve that directly during that coffee break. But even when we work remotely, you need to have a pair of eyes, but you don't have this kind of pair of eyes. You are alone. So it's nice to have at least a pair of eyes. So, it was bad, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. And that's true. Every time I go to the House of Angular office, that's basically what I see happening quite often. I would say, someone sitting on the coffee break, but not really talking about like some casual stuff, but rather technical things. And sometimes someone is, okay, I need to get to my PC to check this solution. So yeah, but that's really also exciting part of our job. All right, Fanny. So I guess that's it, and it's time for your presentation. So the stage is yours.
Awesome, nice. Thank you very much, Chris. So hello everybody again. So Chris already had a very good intro for me, but in any case, this is my card that allowed me to introduce myself. My name is Fanis Prodromou. I'm a Google developer expert for Angular. senior Angular developer at the company ASI, co-organizer of the Angular Meetup here in Greece, and an Angular content creator. So for today's talk, we're going to see an experimental API. Currently, it seems to be really robust, but it's still an experimental. Feel free to experiment with, but it's not advisable to use that in production. But I cross my fingers because currently what we will see is, like I said, really robust and really an amazing API, and I hope not to have that many changes. So the topic today is about the signal forms, and to understand what signal forms is, we have somehow to start, with a simple case, and then from a simple case to go to a more complex form. And we also need to understand the mental model, what is happening behind the scenes. We need to understand also the validators and the logic. The logic part here is something new for signal forms. Despite that we have already seen validators in reactive forms, logic is something new, and this is amazing, and I really like it. And of course, forms could be like what we can see in the first bullet point, simple, but we can also have complex. And in complex form, we need to split them. So we'll see how to split them. And if time permits, we will also see how to have a custom form control, which I do not have a bullet point here, but we'll see how the time goes. So if you would like to start right away working with signal forms, what you can do is just create a new application by using the next flag, -- next. You can do that even when you create a new application or even when you update. So ng update and use again -- next. So to start small, we will see how to create a user login form, and then how to create a user registration form, and then how to create a contract, okay? So here in contract, we don't care about the details, really. We don't care about anything that has to do with the details of the contract. What we care about is that we have a very big form and how to split that. So we'll start with the login, which is the very first one. And the login is, of course, very easy one. We already know what this is all about, where we have the email field, the password field, the login button, and the HTML looks something like that, where we have the email, the password, and the login. Nice. So whenever we work with forms, either this is reactive forms or template-driven forms or now signal forms, what we have to have in mind is the data structure, right? So the data structure in this case is very easy. The only thing that we have to have is just an interface where we have the email of type string and the password of type string. Very easy one. But this is just the data structure. We need now somehow to keep the state of this data structure. And in this case, we can do that, since we are into the signal era, we can do that by using a writable signal, where here I have my login model equals signal generic type, email of type string, password of type string, empty values. Nice. So far, we have nothing related to signal forms. So let's now jump and create our very first signal form. To do that, what we have to do is to use this form helper function, which is part of the Angular's form signals package. And it accepts two arguments. The first argument of this one is the writable signal, the thing that we created just before. And this is very important to understand that one of the key principles of the signal forms is that they do not maintain their own data. We, as developers, are responsible to provide the writable signal, like what we have here into the first argument, as a data model, and the form will be based on this one. So any changes to this data model will affect the form values, and any change to the input field will affect the writable signal. But now that I'm saying form fields, how can we apply the binding now? Well, to apply the binding, having this kind of very simple form, all we have to do is to use this field directive. We import that, and then we have to go into our HTML page, where what we can see is that we have, similar to reactive forms, okay? Similar to them, we have the field where we're providing the path. And here the path is the login form.email, And here we have the login form.password. And please note that the login form is the instance of the form that we created just before. So far, we have managed to create a very simple form, but this is not enough. And we know that this is not enough. What we also need to have is the validators. So let's see how to use the validators, how to add the validators. So the second argument to the form function is the schema function. This is the terminology where we can provide either inline or predefined validators. And in this case, we will see how to use inline validators, and later on, we'll see how to have the predefined one. But what is this root path in the argument name, and why is it called path? Well, it represents the location of your form. In this case, we're accessing the root field. So something very important also is that either we have inline or predefined validators, those validators are following a declarative approach. So let's now add some validators. And what I would like to do is, you know what, I would like my email to be required, which is something very common to reactive forms. And I would like my password to be required. And you know what, I would also like the email field to follow a specific email pattern that have been defined under this email predefined validator. So nice. So currently we have 3 different validators. What I would like now to do is the following. I would like to represent the same form in a different representation, more like a binary tree. Our form is very simple. We have only 2 fields. We have the email and we have the password. Despite that, what we can see here is that we have 3 fields. And this is something very important to have in mind when we work with signal forms, that we can always access the root as a different field. Since we are following a declarative approach, what I would like now to do is the following. I would like to add for my email a specific logic. I would like to add some, let's think that like metadata. I would like my email to be required, to follow the email pattern, and to also be hidden, something that we'll see later, what this hidden is all about. And I would like also my password, again, to have certain logical parameters, and I would like to be required and disabled. Nice. How about now if I feed this binary tree with data? By feeding with data, what we expect to happen is this data to be evaluated based on the logic of the email and the logic of the password. And what will happen when we have an input, we expect to have an output. And the output in this case will be the state. And the state can be invalid or touched or hidden. And the same thing can happen for password, dirty, touched, disabled, very common things that we have already seen in the past. So, okay, now, how can we walk through the form fields? Something very basic. To walk through the form fields, we have to do that by simply using the dot notation. In this case, the root will become the login form. The email, to walk through there, what we have to do is login form.email, and the same thing is happening with the password. Nice. Having the same binary tree, let's now see how can we access the state. To access the state, and this is a consistent pattern in signal forms, we can do that by simply using parentheses. In the case of the login form, to access the state, we have just to have login form parentheses. For the email, first we have to walk through there, login form.email, and have the parentheses. And the same thing is happening for the password. But what do we mean when we say state? So what I mean is that we can grab the value, we can grab the validity, the errors, the disabled state, the hidden, the submitted status, and stuff like that. All right. So you know what? We haven't yet finished the login form. But since we have already seen how to walk through the form fields and how to access the state, let's access the state. And to access the state, what I would like to do now is the following. Below my email field, what I would like to do is to have just a condition. And please note here, I would like first to walk through my email, login form.email. I'm grabbing the state .touched. And this is a signal value, signal type. That's why we have, again, of course, to have the parentheses. And the condition here is very well known. So if this is touch and this is invalid, I would like to have this kind of error message. Nice. And if I want now to disable my button, what I can do is just to have the disabled property here. And please note that I'm grabbing the state of the login form dot invalid. And in this case, my button will be either disabled or not. Nice. But you know what? My email field has two different validators. What I have is the required, and I also have the email pattern, I mean. Wouldn't it be nice here to have different error messages? And this is what we can do. So here, what I'm doing is that I'm looping over the login form.email.errors. I tag by error kind, and we'll understand what the kind is all about. And then we'll have the condition. If my error kind is required, then I can have this kind of error message. Nice. And I can continue here adding more conditions to display more error messages. So for example, I can do if error kind equals email, if error kind equals min length. And I can have different error messages here. Nice. So you know what? Although this works just fine, what I don't like that much is that we have to revisit the HTML every time we have any modification on the email message, on the error message, or we have any new error message to display. How can we improve that? Well, what we can do in this case is to utilize the predefined validators and declaratively have the error messages there. What I mean is that the second argument of the predefined validators, we can add a message. The message property that will be used when the required or the email validator here, predefined validator, they will mark invalid. And in this case, we can just grab the message. So let's now see how the HTML will be formatted having this kind of message. We will do the exact same thing that we were doing previously, meaning that we are iterating over the errors, but this time, I'm just going to interpolate my error message, no more than that. And we'll have the error message already appearing there, which is much, much better. Nice. So we have seen how to create the login form. We discussed about the validators, how to access the state, and we are almost done from the login perspective. To close, let's say, the circle. What we need now is how to submit the actual form. So to submit the form, what we will do is that we're going to utilize the submit helper function of the Angular Forms signals package that accepts two arguments. The first argument is the actual form, and the second argument is the action handler. In our case, the first argument will become the login form. And now let's jump to understand what is happening with the second argument. But before we see that, what I would like to point here is that the crucial point is the argument that we receive, the form. The form isn't just a generic object. It's the validated, let's say, raw form value of your data. And Angular automatically ensures that all validations checks have passed before this arrow function is ever called. This is something like the green light signal that lets you know that, you know what, your data are valid. Please go there and invoke your API. So now what we can see into this arrow function is that we can return undefined, and we return undefined if everything are okay, if everything is processed correctly. Otherwise, we are catching the error from the HTTP. Now let's add a bit more details here to understand what is happening here. So for example, I can use my first value from to convert a specific RxJS to promise. And then as you can see here, what I'm using is the form.value, the raw value. And of course, this depends on your method. If everything are okay, we return undefined. Otherwise, we can return a custom error. And what I really like here is that with the custom error, of course, we grab the error from the HTTP, and we can even assign that error to a specific field so that we have an error indicator that, you know what, something happened to that specific field. Nice. And please note that the submit helper function is not the actual submit event. What I mean is that we need to have an event handler. In this case, we'll have the submit form where we'll have the binding with a click, with a submit event, something like that. And then internally, we'll have the submit helper function. And I know someone now will ask, and why to use this kind of thing? Well, one of the reasons is that we have the door open, let's say, for the Angular team to go there and add more modifications and provide more features for us. But for now, what we can do is utilize this very nice status, the logging for submitting, where we can either display a loading indicator that something is happening, or we can disable the button like what I'm doing here. And in the past, I remember to disable the button, we had to have some workarounds to know when something is currently submitting and when the process is done. And now we get it for free. So that goes all from the login perspective. Now let's jump to see how to create a user registration form. The user registration form, again, is very easy one. What we have is the email, the password, confirm password, country, and state. And if we see the actual form behind the scenes is this one, where again, we're using the same helper function form. We're providing the writable signal, and then we'll have the validators and logic that will go there. Nice. But of course, here, we're not going to talk about how to handle the email. We have already seen that. What I would like to focus on is how to handle this case where we have the password and confirm password. The business requirement here is very well known. The password and confirm password, they should match. And we will see two different approaches. Let's go and see the approach number one. For the approach number one, what we would like to do is to mark the confirm password as invalid and have also an error message here. To accomplish that, we need to create a custom validator. To create a custom validator, what we'll have to do is to use the validate function, the validate helper function, and the first argument that we'll have here is the path. And the path actually denotes where this custom validator will be attached on. And then we'll have the second argument, which is the context. And the context here is very important. So let's pause for a while from this slide, from this code, and let's understand how important the context is. So what you have to understand is that the schema function, either inline or predefined, the thing that we said previously, only runs once to set up the structure. So if it runs once, it's static. On the other hand, the validation logic needs to run every time a field value changes. It must be dynamic. From one side, we'll have the static, and then we'll have the dynamic. And this is where the context comes in place. So the context is the reactive link, is the mechanism that lets your validator access the live value and state of the form. So let's now continue with our code and see the following. The pattern here is consistent to the submit function that we saw previously. What I mean is that if everything is okay, we return undefined. Otherwise, we return a custom error. So let's add a bit of the logic here. And the very first thing is that we have to notice that I would like to attach this custom validator to my confirm password. This is actually the approach number one, that we would like to mark the confirm password as invalid. And the condition now requires us, to apply the condition, requires us to grab the value of the password. How can we do that? Well, to do that, we can use the value of, which retrieves the current value of a different field specified by a path. So now that we have the password value, we can just convert them, and if everything are okay, we return undefined, otherwise a custom error. Nice. And now, please notice that since we are attaching this error message to the confirm password into our HTML, what we have to do is to walk through the confirm password, grab the errors, and apply the error handling into our HTML. And now let's jump to see the approach number two. And into this approach, what the requirements are is that we have to mark the password as invalid and the confirm password as invalid as well at the same time. To accomplish that, again, we need to have a custom validator. But you know what? In this case, we won't use the validate function, but we'll have to use the validate tree helper function. And for the validate tree, the first argument is the path, and then we'll have the context, and the idea then is the same one. The same one meaning that if everything are okay, we return undefined. Otherwise, please note that we do not return a custom error, we return an array of custom errors, since we have to mark multiple fields as error at the same time. So what it is, what the validate tree is, well, it's a specialized tool for validating a group of fields. And perhaps we have now to understand why to use that, where despite the standard validation puts the error on a specific field, validate tree lets you target, like what we already said, multiple fields. And the benefit is that it allows precise error targeting. You can check the parent, but at the same time, we can mark multiple fields as invalid. So let's now see a bit of the implementation of this one. Here, what I'm doing is that I'm grabbing the value and the field of, and we'll see what this field of is all about. And the condition is very easy. I would like from value to grab the confirm password and the password. If everything are okay and if they match, I return undefined. Otherwise, I'm returning two different custom errors. And in this case, please note that I'm utilizing the field of function so that I can grab just the instance of a specific field by providing the path. But this line 6 and line 10, what we're doing here is that we are attaching that error to these kind of fields. Nice. So that was the second approach. Now, what I would like to do is let's move on and let's talk about the country and state. And here, the business requirements are the following. What I would like to do is to have the state required and visible only if the country equals to US. Okay? These are the business requirements, and this is what we have to do. So it seems that now, for the state field, what we have to do is to have a conditional required validator. Can you recall how to accomplish that using reactive forms? Well, perhaps we'll have to have something like value changes, check the value, and if that value equals to US, then we set the validator, update value validity, and things like that. So let's now see how can we accomplish that using signal forms. The very first thing is that we would like to mark the country as required according to our requirements. Nice. And then all we have to do is just to mark the state required. When do you going to apply that, to mark that as required when this condition is true? When my country equals to US. Simple as that. And then according to the requirements, what we have to do is to hide the state field if the value is US. Okay? To display the state field if the value is US. Nice. And so far, things work just fine. But honestly, what I don't like that much is that we have to repeat the same condition both in TS code and into the HTML code. How can we improve that? Well, what we can do is mark the state always required and then utilize the hidden logic part. This is the logic part that we said at the beginning of this presentation, that we have this kind of functionality, and we use a hidden function to conditionally hide a field. And hidden field does not contribute to the validation, touch, dirty, or other state of its field. And please note that the hidden field adds the logic and does not hide automatically the field from the UI. We have to hide that from the UI. But in this case, we do not have to repeat the same condition. All we have to do is just grab the hidden state. And I think this is much better in terms of logic. Nice. So we have already discussed about the schema, and we said about the inline schema, we said about the predefined schema. So let's understand a bit more about the schema and what the predefined is all about. Currently, the registration form, despite that it's not that big form, right? We have the required field, the validate tree, the required here, the hidden part, And it's not that nice to have all of this code into our component. Personally, I would prefer to have all of this code somewhere else in a different file. We can accomplish that using the schema, the predefined schema. So what we can do is to create a separate file, registration form.schema.ts, name it however you like, and then we can utilize the schema helper function, where what we have to do is just go to our component, cut the validators, and paste them here. And this is what the schema will look like. But honestly, I don't care having my schema validators in a different file. To use that now, to use this kind of schema now, what we have to do is, this is my registration form before, and the after will become this thing, which is much easier to reason about, much easier to understand, to read. All we have to do is two arguments, my form model and the registration schema, which is much, much better. Nice. But don't take me wrong. I don't mean that we have the schema only to declutter, let's say, the component. We have the schema to compose different schemas. Let me give you an example. Let's assume that in our application, we would like to have specific validators for the email field, no matter the form. We would like always to have the same conditions. And the conditions could be, you know what, I would like always the email to be required, and I would like the email to follow a specific email pattern as it's defined by this email predefined validator. And the error message will be email is required and email is not valid. Nice. So having this email schema, then what we can do, we can go to the registration form schema file and compose that email schema by utilizing the apply helper function. I would like to apply what my email schema, where, to this path, my path email. Nice. So since we're talking about the schema, let's now make up a bit the requirements. What I would like to do is the following. Let's assume that the user registration form now, we have seen that it accepts only one email, right? So let's assume that we can add multiple emails. We can add additional emails where the user can just click a button to add one more email or remove that, something like an array, okay? So we need now for every individual email to follow this email schema. How can we do that? Well, again, we can compose that utilizing the apply each, which is another helper function. And what this guy is responsible for, it grabs the email schema and it applies that on every array item of the additional emails, just providing this kind of path. Nice. This is very good one. I really like it. So, and that was the last part of the user registration. And now let's see how to create a contract. And you know what? The thing that we have already talked about is that we don't care about the contract details. What we care about is how to split the form. So let's go there. Don't try to read all of the fields. Just let's focus only into the titles. Here we have the contractor information. We have the client information. We have the scope of work, where internally we have the add deliverable, where we can add an array to add array items, actually. We have the project milestones, which again, we can add milestone to mutate the array. We have the project overview, we have the terms and conditions, so you can tell that this is a relatively big form. And this is what the writable signal looks like. So you can tell that it's a big one. So let me ask you now, rhetorical question, of course. Would you prefer to have your HTML, the parent HTML, having just the raw form fields, something like raw form fields for the contractor, the client information, scope of work, project overview, terms and conditions, to have all of them there? Or would you prefer to have nice and tidy small components for the contractor information, the client information, scope of work, project overview, and terms and conditions, which would be much better? The things that I would like to highlight here is that how we are accomplish that. To accomplish that, all we have to do is just to provide the path. the path that I would like to apply a binding to. So in this case, I would like to bind this component, the scope of work, with my for.scope of work, your path. And also here, I added the input name. I decided to have this input name as field just for consistency, but you can do whatever you like. So let's now jump into the scope of work to see how this is happening. And the reason that I would like to see the scope of work is that I would like also to present to you how to mutate your data directly from your scope of work. You mutate your data, and of course, the parent form is updated as well. So to do that, all we have to do is to create an input. Of course, it has to be required, and then we'll have to use the field tree. And the field tree is a generic type. You're providing here your type of that specific field, and that's it. And you have already applied your binding with this small component. Before we see how to have this kind of what the component will look like, the HTML template actually, how it will look like, let's see how to add deliverables. So we have, if you remember, we have a button where we can add multiple items. This is the add deliverable, which is the event handler. And all we are doing here is that we're grabbing the field. This is just a signal. That's why we have to invoke that. We walk through there to the deliverables. And as you can see, I'm grabbing the state. Which state property do you want to have? The value. And this is a writable signal. And then all I have to do is just mutate, update my writable signal as usual. And now if we go into the HTML of this guy, what we have is no more like same thing. We have the field and we have just to walk through these kind of fields. So if we now see that in a more abstract way, how this ideally could work is something like that, where we can have a parent component and we can have multiple children components. And into, for example, child1, we can have my child1 component and child1.schema.ts, name it however you like. But the idea is the schema to have the schema, actually. And then into the child2, we can have the same thing. Same thing, meaning that we can have the component and the schema. Nice. So having all of them in that manner, then what we can do is to go into our parent component and just compose different schemas by utilizing the apply helper function. I would like to apply in my path child1 what the child1 schema. And the same thing is happening with the child2. So that was the last part, and it seems that I have a bit of time. So you know what? Let's jump now to see how to use the custom form control. Few slides and we are done, I promise you. So to create a custom form control, and before we see the code, what we are about to create, no more like a star rating, where by default we have maximum of 5 stars. And here we can see that I have 4 out of 5. Nice. So let's now jump into the code to see a bit more details about this one. And the code, the TS code, what we have is the rating, where I have to provide the value 4, 3, whatever. I have the stars, commuted property to generate the stars array. And then I have just a click handler here. And if we jump to the HTML part, all I have is just a loop over the stars. I'm applying some styling. I have the click handler, and that's it. So all I would like to highlight here is there is nothing related to form here, right? And if we now go to our, let's say, host component, what we have to do is grab the selector, the rating property, just apply a property binding, define your value, and that's it. And we can use that. And now it's time, the same component, like it is, to convert that to a custom form control. All we have to do is to convert the rating in line 4 to value. No more than that. By doing this small change, then our binding will become something like that. We have the up star rating field, and then I have to provide just my path. And you know what? You can still use the code above, which is in comments, but of course, instead of rating, here you have to use value. So we have the same component that can be used individually, and it can be used also at the same time as a form field. And I know the value seems a bit, let's say, magic here. Wouldn't it be nice to follow a specific contract just to be safe? And yeah, what we'll have to follow is to implement the form value control. This is a generic type. And if we do that, this guy will force us to have the value property. And that was my last slide. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Fanis, for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. And now it's time to jump into the Q&A session. We already have a couple of questions, so let me start with the first one. And this is from Kiste. I already have a question because I already had a sneak peek from Dmitro. I'm used to see the form value as a buffer, but with the new form, the buffering is lost. I mean, I guess it's about the, exposing the value as the stream in this case.
Yeah. So I'm not sure what had a sneak peek from Dmitro. I'm used to see the form value, but the buffering is lost. I'm not seeing the question actually here, but what I'm seeing happening here is that what we're doing, the same thing that like what Dmitro did, what I'm doing here is that this is an experimental API, and we expect things to change. And what we see here, perhaps tomorrow we'll have a different API. We don't know. So I remember that Dmitro did an amazing video to his YouTube channel, but it was a bit early. So it was very, very good for him that he took the chance to create and update the community. But things, of course, changed till then. So I think this is the part that we're missing here.
Yeah. The API can always change. That's true. And we can always use the APIs to convert signals to observables or whatever at the very end.
Yep.
All right, so let's look at another one. This looks nice, but how it will work with Matform Field and Angular Material?
Very good question. So honestly, I wanted to have my slides with Matform Field, with Angular Material actually, but it would be a bit more, let's say, crowded, and I decided not to. So the material components are based on control value accessor, and there is already a support with the control value accessor. I have already a very big form. The thing that you saw with the contractor, I have that based on Angular material components, and things work just fine without any additional modification. Just the field, your path, and it works just fine.
Mm-hmm. Right, thank you. And then the next one, let me see. Yeah, we have this one. Will we have async validators?
Yeah, there are async validators already. Honestly, I didn't have the time to dig deeper into the async validators. What I remember is that we can utilize the async validators with the resource API, something like that. But honestly, I would prefer to say, yes, we do have, but the details, I'm not yet sure. I have to dig deeper.
Yeah, sure thing. And yet another one about the validation from Radri. Can we apply validation from custom control? Like now we are implementing validators.
Can we apply validation from custom control? To apply the validation from custom control, it would be great. So if you remember, what we're doing is that we have the custom control, and then we can compose the validators into our, let's say, parent component, either by applying and composing different schemas, or just have the validator directly. And yes, you can do that. And then the question is, all right, how about then if I have an error? Other properties that I didn't present them. Whenever we are implementing the form value control, of course, other than the value, we have the option to provide the errors. So in some states, whether this is stats, whenever this is invalid, and things like that. So these are things that we have to do manually whenever we want to have an error indication to our custom form control.
Mm-hmm. And we have two more questions which are really similar. So let me grab this one. does it interoperate? And this is about the form value control, I guess, with control value accessor. So, you know.
It works just fine.
Yeah. And okay,
and
let it be the
for
last
this one. If sorry, just to go back, if someone was playing around with the next versions, I remember that next 2, 3, 4, up to 5, everything used to work just fine. And then something broke. We didn't have the support of control value accessor. And then into the latest version, we'll have again, of course, the support of control value accessor. And this is the plan. The plan is to support by default the control value accessor, because there are that many components out there that they do support control value accessor, and either UI components or business components for our applications.
Yeah, that's a great news. Definitely, it will be easier to migrate with that.
Yeah.
All right, and the last question is: will the forms have a native reset?
As far as I remember, there is a native reset. I remember that I know that I have seen this method, but honestly, perhaps it will reset the values directly, and it will reset also the status, I mean. So I'm not sure about that. So currently what I'm doing is that I have two things in mind. The async validators that I haven't dig deeper, and the reset, which again, I haven't dig deeper. Two things that for sure I will do. One is that I will provide more content to my YouTube channel called Such Good Profanis. And the second one, of course, Angular.love, where we can follow there. And very soon I will add an article, and I will include these two parts. Thanks for the questions, guys. This is currently experimental, and we need more time to read and dig deeper.
Yeah, it seems everyone is so excited. So, you know, people are just seeking answers already. But yeah, as you said, it's hard to answer everything at this point. All right, so as I said, let it be the last question. There are some more, I believe, but maybe we can adjust them offline. But anyway, thank you, Fanis, for the great presentation, for the Q&A session. And yeah, hopefully see you soon at some future events.
Yep, definitely. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Take care. Bye. All right. So that was all we had for today. And at this point, let me also remind you that we are always open to your contributions. So if you would like to start writing for Angular.love blog, then you are more than welcome. You will find the link to the form in the chat, so you can fill it in and start the process, basically. And also, one more reminder about this 70% discount code for the workshop on modern Angular. In fact, I got a word from Natalia that someone already has taken advantage of it, which is great. But it also means there are only 2 spots left at this point. So again, thank you for being part of the Angular.love community, for your great attendance today. And our next event will be held November 25th at 3 p.m. and featuring Daniel Rabizzo, Sam Vlubergs, and Mateusz Stefańczyk. And we'll talk about a mobile moneymaker in Angular, Angular DevTools, and Angular 21. So pretty hot topics. Also, don't forget to follow us on the social media to stay updated. And until then, as always, stay curious, keep coding, and see you later. Bye.